Thank you so much for being here at the third annual Stories by the Fire, presented by the Burlington Writers Workshop and the Hotel Vermont. We're very grateful to the hotel for allowing us to use this wonderful spot. I mean, where could it be better to tell stories than right in front of the fire? It's like so primal, right? So I want to just introduce our host for the evening. I have had the great pleasure of working with Jen Ferrara for several years. She did a storytelling workshop for Burlington Writers Workshop. I guess it's now 3 or 4 years ago. And I happened to have nothing to do on a Thursday night, and I went to Jen's workshop, and I came home on fire for telling stories, and I have been telling stories ever since. And so I really owe it to Jen, our first oral stories workshop leader for the Burlington Writers Workshop. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Jen. Thank you for hosting us this evening, and let the stories begin.
Thank you, Dina. I have to just also let everyone know that much of what's happening in storytelling in the area is thanks to Dina, who is a fantastic event coordinator and a motivator who keeps us coming out week after week, month after month to tell stories. So I'm so glad you walked into that class that day, Dina. Thank you. So yes, we are here. This is Stories by the Fire. This is the third annual event. How many people here have been to the second or first event we've held? Yeah, awesome, veterans. Now, how many of you have never been to a Stories by the Fire? Oh, even better, newbies, welcome. Oh, it's so great to have all of you here tonight. Well, we've got a really amazing roster of storytellers. Hopefully you got one of these flyers. If not, they're still floating around. And you can read all about what they do and how fabulous they are all the time. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored that Hotel Vermont partners here with the Burlington Writers Workshop. We have this fabulous space. And if you're not sitting, do you guys like this like island here? Because I think the island's like the super special feature, and we should all put these in our houses. And that's just an aside. Okay, so I'm going to stop the jibber jabber, and I'm going to start telling stories. So I'm going to tell a story, and then up after me is going to be Peter Burns, and then we're just going to go from there. It's going to be a great night. So I like thinking about holiday stories, and I've told many because I've been here so many times, but I've had one I've been kind of holding on to for a while because it just wasn't ready. And somehow this year, it's ready now. And I'm so glad I get to share it with you. The winter of my senior year of college, I decided that I was going to get holiday seasonal work at the local mall. And I figured this was going to be pretty easy because I had already worked at the same mall for 2 years at Brookstone. You know, it's like one of those kids holding the clipboard with the apron while people were shopping for bronze nose hair trimmers and monogrammed kaleidoscopes and other really important stuff like that. If I could sell that, I could sell anything, right? But when I put my resume in all over the mall, no one called me back, not Express, not Macy's, not Bloomingdale's, until Sears got back to me. I was not picky. That was great. So I took my nose ring out, and I got spruced up, and I went to my orientation. The woman who was the manager for the holiday season was named Lisa, and she wore head-to-toe lavender with nails to match, and she was very cheerful. She brought me into a tiny little beige room with a VCR for my orientation session, where I learned to not lift with my back and to be nice, which I had under control. And then she gave me my assignment. She said, "You're going to be working the perfume counter." There were 2 really solid reasons why I should not work the perfume counter. The first being that I was an art student, and perfume, this like commercially packaged, commodified ideal of beauty, like totally went against the stuff that I cared about at art school. Most of my friends smelled of patchouli, sweat, and marijuana. We did not wear perfume. And secondly, which is really maybe should be first, is that I'm kind of allergic to perfume. Like, I don't know exactly how, but I know that when my mother wears like Estee Lauder, blah, 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 I run to the other side of the house. Because if I'm there when she sprays it, my sinuses swell up. Sometimes I get a migraine. The actual opening of this same mall, I had gone to Crabtree and Evelyn with my girlfriends and was so nauseous I had to run out. And it was probably that like gardenia, licorice, room spray kind of combination stuff. Whatever it was super bad news. And so I had all these ideas of what could totally go wrong working the perfume counter. But I was 20 and not that good at advocacy and negotiation, and I didn't say any of that stuff. I just said, are there like any other positions I could have? And Lisa went from super chipper to cool and bureaucratic, and she said, no, lots of people want this position. Take it or leave it. And so I took it. And now the Sears perfume counter back in the early 90s was really quite a thing of beauty. It was like a 3-sided glass display case that was just packed full of perfumes. And I can still remember the names, like, Giorgio and Poison and Chloe and Obsession and Dracar Noir, all the good stuff. And it was the whole case. And then on top of the case were all these little spray bottles of testers that anyone could go in and spray for free anytime they wanted. And in the middle of all that action was the cash register, and behind the cash register was little old me. And roughly 1,000 people came to Sears each day during the holiday season. And I think roughly 300 of those came and shopped in the perfume department. And at least 100 felt totally comfortable spraying those testers as much as they wanted. And of those, there were about 10 each day who thought it was okay to spray that stuff on me. These were mostly older gentlemen. I think they just saw me as a stand-in for their granddaughter or maybe their mistress, and I'm really not sure, but they would ask at least, right? They were classy, they asked. And then I would say no, and I would politely give them a piece of paper they could spray the perfume on. All but this one guy who was small and slight and fast, and his hand shot out like a snapping turtle, grabbed my wrist and sprayed perfume before I even knew what happened. And the sting on my wrist, it was like poison. I'm not sure it was poison because I don't remember, but it was awful. The procedure to leave work each day was very, very dense. I had to take off my clothes and immediately throw them in the laundry. I had to take a shower and wash my hair every night to try and get out the smell. But you know what they say about fishermen and how you can never quite get? It is so the same with perfume counter work. It was like I was sweating this just unholy mix of smells every night. I couldn't get rid of it. My sinuses were permanently clogged. They just swelled up within the first 5 minutes and just stayed that way, which might have been a blessing. And it was just like that until Christmas Day when we all had off. And I just had a break from all the stench. And then we all had to return the next day to do returns. And there were two kinds of returns. There were the folks who were really just hoping to make some cash. They just were happy to return the cologne or, whatever it was and get some money, which was a little depressing, but okay. And then there were the people who were just utterly bewildered that someone had gifted them this thing to begin with. They were like, I don't know why he thought I'd like that. And I felt like I wish I could go back in time and just tell the person when they were buying it, guy, no, if you don't know that the person likes the perfume, do not buy it for them. It is so personal smell, right? It's like deep down who we are. It's the stuff we had before we had, the printed word and internet and fire even. We had smell. We've had it a long time. And as much as my friends care about smelling unwashed and patchoulied, and I care about smelling like no perfume whatsoever, these people in this store are buying this stuff to say something about who they are. And this was deep stuff. Also, not that important, because I'm temporary and I don't have to stay here and do this any longer. So on my exit interview day, I turned in my timesheet, I met with Lisa Lavender, we had a nice chat, and she said, if you want to come back next year, we'd be happy to have you. And I smiled and nodded and sort of stared off into the middle distance. And if I could have seen my future then, I would have known as an art school graduate, it was going to be full of retail. There were bagels, there were bookstores, there were box offices, but never again was there a perfume counter. Thank you. Up now is the fantabulous Peter Burns. You might have seen him around town. He's told stories all over the place. He's been a professional storyteller for over 30 years, which is really saying something. And around here, I'm very impressed. You know that. Peter knows I'm impressed. And I practiced, because I'm really terrible with mic stands, and everyone knows it. But look at this.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I've been instructed to tell you not to tilt it because of the perfect synchronicity of everything.
I won't tilt it.
All right. Peter Burns, everyone.
I do lots of different things. I bike ride, I teach swimming. But one thing that I've introduced myself as, I introduced myself this way once. I work with people who are mentally ill on the weekends. And that wasn't as clear as it could have been. So now I say, for more than 35 years, I've worked with people who have psychiatric disabilities. Now, our clients, our residents, they don't get out much. So we have regular field trips. In the spring, we go to a sugar shack. In the summer, there's camping. In the fall, we go apple picking. And every December, we go to White's Christmas Tree Farm. Many of our clients don't have close family ties, so the holidays can be difficult. Really, more even than Thanksgiving, the Christmas tree outing is the beginning of our year-end celebrations. I'm going to tell you about last year's expedition, and you'll notice I don't really talk much about our clients, and that's because they're protected by really strong confidentiality laws. Luckily, my coworkers are not protected by the same laws, because if there were, I would have no story at all. We left in the early afternoon, right after lunch. Janet, who works in the group home with me, and I were in one car, and Shannon was in another car. She's a case manager for the people who live at the group home. Now, as we left the driveway, I broke out the Dentine Ice chewing gum. That's one of our traditions. Every time we go on a field trip, I offer chewing gum to everybody. And traditions are made up of both small details and big structures. We drove to White's Christmas Tree Farm. The radio was playing Christmas music, and nothing happened. Now, the paradox is that for people who are psychiatrically disabled, who are in a group home, they have seen more craziness in their lives than we can ever imagine. Chaos and just tremendous pain. So to go on a trip and have nothing happen is great. That's amazing. I mean, it's not great for a storyteller. I've got to make up for it, as I go along. But for our clients, it was just a wonderful thing. Well, we got to White's Christmas Tree Farm, and we all get out, and they gave us a saw and a sled. Now, this was Shannon's very first time on the Christmas tree farm, and she was really excited. There was snow on the ground, so I let her drag me on the sled for about 50 yards. She was amazingly fast. Now, Jan, who I mentioned earlier, is a great person, a great coworker, but she is picky about Christmas trees. And we had to find the perfect Christmas tree. Not a good enough Christmas tree, but a perfect one. And that took a while. We were wandering around, and finally we found it. Now, another tradition is that I lie on my belly in the snow and saw down the tree. It's not my favorite tradition. But luckily, Shannon was there, and she's tough, and we took turns, and we sawed down the tree, and we put it on the sled, and we dragged it back. Well, one of my coworkers and the clients went into the store and had free hot chocolate. And you see there's an echo of this story tonight because there's free hot chocolate. The world is so enmeshed. So much is connected. So we went in there and they had coffee, and I talked to Tom, who owns the Christmas tree farm, while he processed the tree. And I reminded him of the time 2 years ago when the wind was blowing so hard that the roof was starting to lift off the store, and I had to hold the ladder while he hammered down the roof. I said, "Good times, right?" He said, "Yeah." Now, Christmas tree technology has also moved forward. Did you know there is a Christmas tree shaker? Isn't that amazing? There's this thing that gets rid of all the snow. You put it in, and it shakes the tree. I mean, that was, to me, amazing. And then they slide it down a chute, and they cover it with green cloth and trim it with, how you say in your language, power saw? Chainsaw, thank you. Bill is a lumberjack. He will be on later, but I brought him here for technical assistance should I need it, which I obviously did. Yeah, when I saw him, I was anyway. So, as I said, technology moves forward even as traditions stay the same. And they have this great thing. They have a tree holder with a spike in it, and they'll drill a hole in the bottom of the tree, and you take the tree and you slam it onto the spike, and it actually stands up, which is amazing because ordinary Christmas tree holders are designed to torture you, right? They never work. They fall over, they lean. It's really frustrating. So I was really excited. We got everything onto Shannon's tree, Shannon's vehicle, and we headed back. Now, Shannon had to do an errand before she went back to the group home, and we sat there and we waited for her for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. We finally texted her, and she said, "Oh my God, I forgot I had a Christmas tree on my car." So she came back, and by that time it was late. We set up the Christmas tree, and we decorated it. We put on the lights. And then, you know, there's that magic moment. The room was dark, and the lights are about to go on, and it doesn't matter whether it's at work or at home, whether the people you're with are mentally ill, disabled in another way, or perfectly normal. There is that magic moment when the lights go on and the tree is there in your room. And that's a moment that I hope you all have this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. Up next, we have Owen Foley. Owen's funny. He's poignant. He's a great storyteller. He also knows quite a lot about pharmaceuticals. He's an all-around Renaissance kind of guy. So let's give a hand for Owen. We're not supposed to change the angle if you heard me saying that. So is that good?
Perfect. We'll make it work.
You're great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jen. When I was in high school, my parents dropped a bomb on me and my brother during Christmas season. they were going to change things up. Instead of just the four of us, they were going to invite an extra guest to join us for Christmas. His name is Great Uncle Babe. And he's the wild card. We had some great times, wonderful memories. All sorts of weird things could happen when Uncle Babe was there. Sometimes for Christmas, he would give you a card with a $5 bill in it. Other years, he would give you a card with 5 $1 bills in it. You never knew what you were going to get. One year, he actually ate potpourri. But in his defense, it was on a side table and there were orange peels in it. So I think we can give some leeway. Having Uncle Babe around for Christmas became a tradition that carried on for several years. And it was always a big to-do, because Uncle Babe is a weird, I don't want to say weird guy. He's a unique character. He's my grandfather's older brother, so I don't know why he's called Babe. Maybe it's because he was a mama's boy, to the extent that he promised his mother he would never leave her, never move away. So except for a stint in the Marine Corps, he lived in the same house with her all the way until she died, and then for almost 30 years after. He's still living there today because he takes his promises seriously. And getting him from that big house was always a huge ordeal, because Uncle Babe does not travel well. He is a man of routines, and for his past 93 years, he follows the same routines. He goes to the same restaurants where he has food, which is his favorite thing in the world. And every meal he has is the best meal that he has ever had before, especially when he goes to his favorite restaurant, which is the hospital cafeteria in Sharon, Connecticut. He does not live in Connecticut. He finds people to drive him across state lines so he can go to the hospital cafeteria and they know him by name. So whenever I had to go get him, it was always a huge ordeal because he didn't like my car. He preferred to ride high in a minivan. So I'd borrow my parents' minivan and drive down and pick him up and drive him back up. One year, as we were coming back to my parents' house, he broke wind. And being a gentleman, he rolled down the window, and he promptly broke it. So on December 22nd, we had to drive 2 hours on the highway with a wide open window. But that was part of the mystique of Uncle Babe. You never knew what could happen. I think my favorite memory of a Christmas with Uncle Babe was when I was probably about 16 or 17, and we had a big snowstorm, and the power got knocked out, which in the early 2000s was a bad thing because we didn't have battery-operated devices. So all the new stuff that we got that had to be plugged in and charged, because no one planned ahead for Christmas, now was sitting dormant, and we were stuck, just the 5 of us. But it actually turned out pretty well. We sat by the fireplace, and being good upstate New York people, we still had the grill on the patio, so we just shoveled a couple of feet of snow off it and put the roast in there. And as we were sitting there just telling stories and talking the way families used to in the old times, we had a crank-up radio going, and all of a sudden Uncle Babe popped out of nowhere singing Bing Crosby. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, because it was music. And we had been on a technology blackout for the entire day. And everything worked out well. It could have been a disaster, but let me tell you, that roast beef was the best meal that he's ever had. Uncle Babe doesn't get out much anymore. He still lives there by himself with his dog. He still gets all sorts of trips to wonderful restaurants like the Sharon Hospital cafeteria or Cracker Barrel. And everywhere he goes, he is able to have the best meal he ever had. And that type of simplicity is something to be admired, especially in this time where we all have so much. Thank you.
Owen Foley, thank you so much. All right, show of hands, who thinks that the UVM hospital cafeteria is really pretty awesome? Yeah, right? It is not bad. It is like good. I was stuck there when I had my baby, which was a good thing, but I was stuck there over Thanksgiving, and I got Thanksgiving dinner there with real mashed potatoes. So please let him know when he's up here, UVM Hospital. Okay. So our next storyteller, fabulous storyteller. This is a real treat. Cardi Raper. I have to tell you this. I have to tell you the book she's published because it's so amazing. Well, I'm not sure it's a book, actually, Cardi. Is it a book? Oh, it's a book. Okay. A Woman of Science, an extraordinary journey of love, discovery, and the sex life of mushrooms. Right? And then her other, not quite so woo-woo, but very nice title is An American Harvest. So I know we're going to hear some wonderful stuff, Cardi, and please come on up. I can't wait to hear your story. Let's give her a round of applause. Nice to see you. We're gonna not move the mic. So tell me, is this a good height for you? Pardon? Is this a good height for you?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, that first book was called Love, Sex, and Mushrooms, but the publisher changed it. We're going back to that title. My topic tonight is Lake Champlain. I love...
Get really close to the mic.
Okay, sorry. How about that? Okay. I love Lake Champlain. I've loved Lake Champlain ever since I can even remember anything. I was born and bred across the lake, right over there, Plattsburgh, New York, the youngest of 6 children and the only girl. And we used Lake Champlain. We had so much fun on Lake Champlain. We'd swim in it in the summer. We'd go playing on over at the municipal beach, it was called. My mother called it the miserable beach because we brought sand back into our nice clean house. And we made sand castles, we swam. I learned to swim very early in my life. And we had a boat. We had a little rowboat that had a freeboard about that much. And I'd take it out all by myself on exploring the bay. And gosh, every once in a while a squall would just come up out of nowhere. And that boat would get filled with water. And I felt very confident because I could swim. And my folks said, if the boat turns over, just hang on to it. It'll take you to shore. And that happened once or twice. But my favorite time on Lake Champlain when I was a little girl was in the wintertime. In the wintertime, I had a brother, the middle one. He had a Model A Ford back in the late 1930s. And we would go out on the ice. The lake was frozen all the way across in those days. And he'd zoom up his car, and then he'd jam on the brakes and go. Then he'd go up and do it again, and that was most fun. But when I got older, what we would do is we'd attach a rope to the back bumper of the car, and then we'd skate on the lake and let the car pull us along, or if there was snow on the lake, we would go snow skiing with the car. Well, one day, I think it was probably early February, a Saturday morning, I heard some noise down in the basement. And it was a pounding noise. I walked down to the basement to see what was going on. My oldest brother, Paul, was there pounding away on this kite-shaped frame. And I said, "What you doing, Paul?" He said, making a skate kite. A skate kite? What for? What are you going to do with it? Well, there's going to be a big wind out of the north tomorrow. and I'm going to go out on the lake and let it take me all the way down to the family farm, which is 10 miles south. I said, well, gosh, that's a long way. He said, you want to come? I said, sure. But I can't hang on to that kite. It's bigger than you are. And he said, oh, I'll hang on to the kite. You hang on to me. So we took off in front of the McDonald Monument, and the bay was frozen solid. He got out the kite. I got behind him, hugged him around the waist, and we went whooshing down the lake. It was so beautiful. It was like sailing, only better. And then all of a sudden he said, hey, watch out, sis, you gotta jump. I said, what do you mean you gotta jump? He said, there's a big crack in the ice coming up, and it was like shaped like this. There was a piece of ice over another piece of ice under it, and water in between. He said, when I say jump, jump. So we jumped up over this ice, went over this crack, and then we sailed on very nicely beyond that. We got picked up down at the farm. When we ended up near, I think it was just north of Osable Point, where Route 9 comes before you get to the point. And one of my other brothers picked me up. We went home, took a hot bath, had supper, laid by a crackling fire in the living room, listening to, I guess it was Jack Benny and Fred Allen and those programs over the radio, eating apples and popcorn and butternuts. Well, we also skied a lot. And we would go to Lake Placid sometimes, but sometimes we'd drive across the lake to come over to Stowe. And Stowe had a better way of getting up the hill. It had a chairlift at that time. So one morning, Paul came by and said, wake up, sis. We're going over to Stowe to ski. Okay, we went over to Stowe, skied our legs off. Coming back, we got into the car, got onto the lake, and he said, hey, sis, do you want to drive? And I'd just gotten my learner's permit, and I said, oh, wow, I'd love to drive. So we got on the lake, and there I was. He hitched himself up to the back of the bumper, put his skates on. He was going to skate Jor behind us. And I was driving, and I was trying to curve a little bit right, and curve a little bit left, just to give him a thrill. And all of a sudden, I happened to look around, and he said, and I looked over there, I turned around, looked over there, open body of water. We were headed for it. I remembered at that very moment, thank goodness, that my youngest brother, Jonathan, had taught me that when you come on an icy road, you come to a curve, you never jam on the brakes. You never jam on the brakes. You move your wheel just gently and go around the curve. That's what I did. There was the open body of lake. I was just gently moving the wheel, let it drift to a stop. We avoided the lake, the open water. I got out of the truck, and my legs were shaking like leaves on a high, windy day. Anyway, we survived, and I still love that lake. I still love that lake. I live on a bluff overlooking it every morning. I wake up, I turn on my left side, I open my right eye, I look out there, and I see how the waves are moving and which way the wind is going. And I watch the birds getting their morning feed, and I I especially look for that white peak of Whiteface, the very tippy top of Whiteface. On a nice clear day, you can see it. So I enjoy it now as an old person in my own way, this lovely work of moving art.
Oh, that was wonderful, Cardi. Thank you so much. I love just seeing your experience of the lake from a young person kind of inventing the X Games on the lake to this, beautiful portrait out your window. So up next, we have Annie Mallow, who is a storyteller around town and also an actress. You may have seen her recently in I Hate Hamlet. Anyone see Annie in I Hate Hamlet? Yes, thank you. I really glad someone raised their hand for that. I'm sorry I did not, but I totally can't wait to see you tonight, Annie. So let's get you up here and get me out of here with this blah blah. So good to see you.
What were those questions about our favorite fairy tales?
Yeah, did you have a favorite favorite? Just so that I had something to say. Otherwise, I talk about the play you were in and ask people to raise their hands.
Yeah, don't do that.
That's what happens. This is all just like right as you see it. This is how it works. We're just like throwing off the curtain. Real life. Ready? Is this good?
Is that the right hand?
Yeah, we can't tilt it.
Oh, that's all right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that works. So, about 30-odd years ago, Bill and I worked for the same organization here in Burlington. Worked in different offices. I worked uptown, Bill worked downtown, but we shared a lot of the same coworkers. We happy houred after work with the same crowd. We saw a lot of the same movies together, and then we'd critique them afterwards over coffee and dessert. We had similar tastes. We had compatible humor, companionable silences. Though, if you asked me now why it is that I proposed a brief love affair, as I did, or why Bill said yes, as he did, I would have to say it was none of those things. It was December. It started way back in 1986. Bill and I had just seen a movie, and he was dropping me off in his car at my house. I lived over here on St. Paul Street, and it was freezing cold, and we're shivering in the car, and Bill says, so, you're leaving to go back to school soon, huh? And that was true. I had dropped out of school, and I'd been working for a few years. That's how Bill and I had met. But I had reapplied. I'd been accepted at NYU, and I was headed down there in January to start the spring semester. And I said, yeah, I am. And then, I don't know, out of the blue, by chance, I just said, what do you think, what if we, well, how would you like to have a fling before I go? And Bill's eyes got really, really big, and so I just started talking faster, and I said, well, I'm only here for another 5, maybe 6 weeks, and we could, and it would just be, and Bill said, it would be what? And I said, please? And Bill said, no, thank you, but I just couldn't, it's very sudden, and I said, please? And Bill said, okay, look, I just don't do this sort of thing. I'd like to do this sort of thing, but and he kept on talking, and instead of saying please again, I lifted his hand off of the gear shift, and I turned it over, and I breathed very softly into his palm. And Bill got very quiet. And then I lowered my lips down onto his skin. And Bill said, okay. It's barely 5, 6 weeks. We spent so much time together. I remember after a storm, trudging through hip-deep snow up Mount Philo to come tumbling down on a toboggan. And then tumbling down onto his waterbed. It was the 80s, okay, everybody had waterbeds. And it was great, but what I remember most, actually, is the falling asleep afterwards. Lying on our backs with just our fingertips touching, and laughing, and the laughter creating this complex pattern of ripples underneath us. And then Bill would get really quiet, and he would look up at this framed picture on the wall. It was a photograph of him and his father walking arm in arm on a beach in Connecticut. Bill's dad had died just 2 years previously at a family wedding. You know, one minute he was singing and dancing, and the next minute he was dead. And Bill was right at that 2-year cusp, okay, where the grief begins to subside. You don't ever stop missing the person, and you don't ever stop feeling sad, but the 2-year mark is right about the time that grief as a discrete and wrenching emotion begins to subside and unlock its jaws a little bit. I remember we used to take these incredibly long car rides and just to talk. You know, one time we drove all the way up to Montreal just to do some holiday shopping. Another time we drove down to Connecticut, and I got to meet his mom and his sister in New Britain. And I remember sitting around his mom's kitchen table and talking, and they were remembering his dad, the way that he spoke and the way that he walked, and his unwavering belief in astrology. And not one of them believed in astrology, and Bill was a scientist through and through. But they loved this man so much that they understood that astrology was just his way in, you know, his symbol set for connecting with other people and understanding them. So, of course, it was incredibly interesting to them that I was a Virgo. And as a Virgo, you know, my shining moment as a Virgo was sending him a bouquet of flowers anonymously at work, and it was just a single rose surrounded by a dozen purple irises. The florist thought I was nuts, not for the arrangement, but that I was willing to pay the delivery fee, the outrageous delivery fee for such a small bunch of flowers. We had such a good time together, and really we're almost never out of each other's sight. Eventually, one of his housemates pulled him aside and said to him privately, said, "You know, this is great. Maybe you ought to think about asking her a question." And Bill relayed this conversation to me with a laugh and a smile. And if it was his way of obliquely asking me if I would consider answering a question like that, I'll never know, because I just as obtusely smiled and laughed back and said nothing. Eventually, it was time for me to leave for New York, and I spent one last very restless night in January at Bill's house. My U-Haul was packed and parked by a snowbank out in the driveway. The alarm went off. It was pitch black outside. And so I slid very slowly out of bed, you know, trying to make as few waves as possible. Bill came to me in the shower, and without a word, washed my hair. Afterwards, he dried me with a very thick yellow towel. I dried him with a blue one. And then we stood there wrapped and leaned on each other and cried. After I'd moved, we talked a few times on the phone. Bill sent me a card. I mailed him back his house keys. But then we lost touch over, you know, after about a year or two, we stopped communicating entirely. And I really wish we hadn't have lost touch with each other, I mean, I would give anything to be able to sit and talk and laugh and just listen to where his life has taken him since then. Maybe tell him a few of my own misadventures. I don't even know if Phil's alive. I have to admit, I've done my share of internet stalking, and there's nothing out there past about 1990. Nothing. But if he is alive, if you happen to know Bill, if you happen to see him, tell him I said hi. Thanks.
Oh, Annie. Thank you. That was a wonderful story. Let's all dry our eyes, take a breath, but not too much, because we might need our handkerchiefs again, I don't know. Up next is Bill Torrey, and he's our last storyteller of the night. He's a wonderful storyteller. Always a pleasure. I can't really tilt the angle. Is that good?
Yeah, it's good. Can you hear me now? I'm going to get right on this thing. I grew up during the 60s, youngest of 6 kids. My dad worked as a mechanic all his life, so we never were really flush with money. But you know, I never really lacked for anything that I really needed. Of course, my dad, he grew up during the Great Depression, and he knew what hardship was. He used to tell us kids that they was so poor that he had to eat his cereal with a fork and pass the milk on to the next kid. But he knew what was important in life. And a few years before I was born, he scraped up enough money, $50, to buy an acre of land up in West Bolton to build a camp on. Now that first camp was pretty rough. It was just scrounged up lumber and a lot of tar paper. But what I remember about it is it had cardboard ceilings, not sheetrock. Sheetrock cost money, but cardboard, which led to some great entertainment for us kids, because we could lay in our bunks at night in the dark with our BB guns and shoot at the sound of the mice running on that cardboard over our heads. This was actually great practice for later on when we got older, because shooting at moving things in the dark by sound was a fair description of opening morning of deer season. But we used to go up to camp all the time. We used to go up in the summer for barbecues and picnics and berry picking and trout fishing. Going to camp in the summer was great, but going to camp in the winter, now, that was an adventure. I remember this one winter Saturday, just my mom and dad and I were going up for a day of snowmobiling. Dad loaded the snowmobiles on the truck the night before. He always liked to get a good early start. We got up that morning, butt crack of dawn, and it was wicked cold. It was colder than a polar bear's toenails. It was so cold. The wolves were eating the sheep just for the wool. So we all piled into the old GMC pickup there, and he fired it up, and we headed out down the road. About 6-7 miles down the road, my mom says, "I smell something." He says, "Oh, you're always smelling something, woman." We went another mile or two, and she says, "No," she says, "I smell something burning." He says, "There ain't nothing burning." And all of a sudden, he slams on the binders, come to a screeching halt on the side of the road. He bails out, runs to the front of the truck, he pops the hood on it, and this big black whopping cloud of smoke comes billowing out. Seems the night before, when he knew it was going to be wicked cold, he had taken this old pink blanket been in our family for years and years and years, and he had folded it up and put it over his beloved GMC engine there that he had to keep it warm, and he'd forgotten all about it, and he'd gotten on the exhaust manifold, and it's on fire. Well, he grabs it on the corners, and he's trying to yank it off of there, but it's caught on something, so all he does is he just fans it up and down 4 or 5 times, and releases this big black billow of smoke every time. It looked like we were trying to send smoke signals to the neighboring tribe or something. He finally gets her loose, and he throws it on the snowbank on the side of the road there. And then my mom and I watched my dad go over and do this little war dance on top of that blanket, trying to snuff it out. And then he gets done doing that, and he looks up and down the road both ways, make sure nobody was watching. And then he jumps back in the truck, and we light out of there like a big-ass bird. And nobody says a word. Not a peep. Well, we went up to camp and had a peach of a day snowmobiling. And when we come back down home there late in the afternoon, we drive by the scene of the crime. That old remnants of that pink blanket laying there, and it's still smoking. We all look at each other, and we just lose it. We just start laughing so hard, I think I had tears running down my leg. As I think back, camp was one of the best gifts that my dad ever gave me. It turned out to be so much more than just a deer camp. But isn't that like a lot of things in our lives that give us more than what we expect? Why, even an old pink blanket that kept us snug and warm when it was nice and new and made us smile and laugh when it was old and tattered and even on fire. Season's greetings, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Bill. So, we've come to the end of another evening of Stories by the Fire. And listening to these stories tonight, I really got this sense of why this is so important. These are the dark days, right? This is the time where it's pitch black out now, right? And we're thinking it's time for bed, but it's only time for dinner. And we're feeling cold, and sometimes we're feeling alone. And there are people who have left us. And there are people we haven't met yet. And there are things we remember and we need to share. And I'm so glad we could all share our stories with you tonight. I hope you go and find your people and share your stories with them and ask them their stories and stay warm together and keep making the fire, keep it burning, keep it warm. Thank you all again. It was an honor to host. Let's applaud Burlington Writers Project for making this happen. Hotel Vermont for giving us a beautiful space. RETN, our media sponsor. If you want to see these again or share these stories with your friends, they will be on Channel 16 and most likely Channel 216 and a Roku channel and lots of other places. And if you want to tell more stories, there are lots of places you can do that. Dina and I coordinate an event called Storytelling Vermont that's once a month at the Light Club Lamp Shop on Tuesday nights. There are many other wonderful events. Are we still happening? Okay. There are other lovely events. Please talk to all the storytellers. They'll tell you where to come. If you want to write some stories, please connect with Burlington Writers Project and make your stories get out there in the world too. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.